We're back, joined for our final installment of this very important conversation over the hour with Douglas J. Feith, a friend and colleague of many years, notably the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy during the George W. Bush administration. You really will not understand much of what we're talking about without addressing it through the prism of his superb memoirs, War and Decision Inside the Pentagon at the Dawn of the War on Terrorism. Doug, again, thank you for your time. Let's turn to, crystal ball gazing, if we can. What do you think the prospects are, since much is now being made, as we discussed earlier, of this deal as an alternative to war, that we may actually wind up with war as a result of this deal? A war that, by the way, I believe has been underway since 1979 on the part of the Iranians against this country and others. But the possibility of it turning into something vastly worse for the reasons we've just been discussing.
Well, one of the famous traits of many governments all over the world throughout history is that they accomplish the opposite of their intended result. And I think that this deal on the Iranian nuclear program is going to have the effect of increasing the drive of many other countries in the region and around the world to get nuclear weapons of their own. I think one of the worst consequences of legitimating the Iranian program after years of efforts by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the UN Security Council and the European Union negotiators, and then the group that negotiated this deal, one of the consequences of Iran's defying all of them and violating its non-proliferation obligations under the non-proliferation treaty and doing all of that and then emerging on the other side as a victor that gets rewarded and gets sanctions lifted and everything else without having to actually give up its nuclear weapons program, is that they proved that the Iranians proved that they can defy and essentially destroy the non-proliferation architecture of the world without penalty. And that lesson is going to be seen and heeded by, in first instance, all their neighbors in the Middle East. And I think it's likely that we will see an interest in nuclear weapons programs on the part of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and other countries. And I think that will have effects not only in the Middle East, but around the world. And one of the most worrisome aspects of this entire horrible deal is not simply the bad things that Iran will do, but even if Iran completely complies with its obligations, one of the consequences of this deal is going to be to encourage other countries around the world to get their own nuclear weapons programs. And if we wind up down the road a few years, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, with a world in which 20 countries or 30 countries have their own nuclear weapons, the likelihood of nuclear war increases enormously. And the world becomes a much more dangerous place. And that's something that is extremely ironic, because this president came into office committed to what he called nuclear zero, or a world with zero nuclear weapons, which I think was an unrealistic goal in any event. But he's going to wind up achieving a world with 2, 3, 4 times the number of nuclear weapons countries as a result of this extremely ill-advised diplomacy that he's done with the Iranians.
Yeah. And Doug, one of the things that I'm struck by, I think you're absolutely right, of course, is that countries that seek this kind of capability, especially under circumstances in which they feel an imminent threat from this rising hegemon, is that they don't have to go about it the way the Iranians have done, painstakingly and covertly building all of the necessary elements of the food chain, if you will, of a nuclear weapons program. They can simply buy them. And there seem to be people who are quite willing to sell them, and probably Pakistan, they have in the past with A.Q. Khan's network, but also presumably the cash-strapped North Korea. So we may see this upon us rather quickly. And as you say, it seems to me not only the real prospect of nuclear war in a very difficult and dangerous part of the world, but possibly not one that can be contained to it. And that brings me to perhaps our last question or line of questioning, Doug, about the decision of the Obama administration to pursue UN approval of this deal through the Security Council on Monday before Congress was given an opportunity, even under the very truncated and, I think, anti-constitutional arrangements set out by the Corker-Cardin deal. Talk about the role of the UN, the role of the administration in sort of raising up its authority over our own sovereign decision-making process, such as it is.
Well, the president has closed off the options that Congress had by going to the UN and getting the sanctions removed before he's even heard from Congress as to whether it approves this deal. And I think members of Congress have every right to be angry that the president showed basically no respect at all for Congress's views on this subject before he took the crucial action of removing those sanctions. What a lot of people don't understand, it's clear from the debates on television and radio that this is not a point that people appreciate. If the president had not gone to the UN to remove those sanctions, the situation we would be in would be this. Those sanctions said that the Iranians have to actually roll back their nuclear program. Those sanctions said that there were severe economic penalties imposed on Iran unless Iran, for example, completely stopped enrichment of uranium. And it said that those sanctions cannot be removed unless the UN weapons inspectors certified that the Iranians had done a long list of things, including things like completely stop their uranium enrichment. Now, had this deal not been made, those sanctions would have remained in place. And even if the Chinese and the Russians regretted that they supported the sanctions to begin with, there was nothing they could have done about them, because in order to remove them, you'd have to pass a new resolution that the United States would have to vote for. We had a veto. And so we could have kept those sanctions in place indefinitely. And so when the president says there was no alternative to this deal, the alternative to this deal would have been simply to leave those UN sanctions, which were quite tough. Now, it's important to understand they were not tough enough to actually force the Iranians to give up their weapons program. That's been clear. But they were tough enough to do really severe economic harm to Iran. And that at least limited the Iranian government's ability to do harm.
Which brings us back to your earlier point that there was a coercive diplomatic option still on the table until the president removed it through this action meant clearly to circumvent and, I think, sabotage whatever congressional oversight there might have been. Doug, we will be fighting them on the beaches and fighting them in the streets on this one, I think, in the Congress and elsewhere, and we look forward to doing so with your insights and great leadership. Thank you for all of your service to our country. It is a distinct privilege to have you as a colleague and friend, and I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to discuss all of these issues with us, and I hope you'll come back to us again very soon to do more of it, especially as this, possibly tragic circumstance plays out. I hope the rest of you will come back for more tomorrow. Same time, same station. Until then, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks for listening.